I've always accepted what I am. Why wouldn't I accept what I can be? Death of the author, Nnedi Okorafor. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Shamansky, and today we're reviewing Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. Okorafor is a well-regarded Nigerian-American sci-fi and fantasy author. She's won multiple Hugo and Nebula Awards and a lot more to go with those. She's most well-known for her Binti trilogy and her 2014 novel, Lagoon. This latest book, Death of the Author, is a super unique blend of contemporary sci-fi and literary fiction. It's also a new entry in the weirdly popular subgenre of books about books or books about authors. Let me read you the synopsis. The future of storytelling is here. Life has thrown Zelu some curveballs over the years, but when she's suddenly dropped from her university job and her latest novel is rejected, all in the middle of her sister's wedding, her life is upended. Disabled, unemployed, and from a nosy, high-achieving, judgmental family, she's not sure what comes next. In her hotel room that night, she takes the risk that will define her life. She decides to write a book very unlike her others, a science fiction drama about androids and AI after the extinction of humanity. And everything changes. What changes is a tale of love and loss, fame and infamy, of extraordinary events in one world and another. And as Zelu's life evolves, the lines between fiction and reality begin to blur. Because sometimes a story really does have the power to shape the world. The audiobook is narrated by Liz Feedy and is a little over 16 hours long. It's available on CELA in human narrated audio. I'm not reviewing this one alone, though. I'm doing it with Karen McKay and Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access. Karen is a communication specialist for the Center for Equitable Library Access, and Theresa Power is the Access Librarian for CELA. Welcome, both of you.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm excited to talk about this book because it feels like a book club book. One of those books that's easily discussable. It's not fluffy. It's quite deep. It's fairly complex. Really well set up for conversation. And I found the synopsis. I don't know about you guys, but I found the synopsis a little bit vague. But in short, this book is about a woman who gets super mega famous for writing a best-selling sci-fi novel called Rusted Robots. The plot follows a couple things: her rise to fame because of the success of Rusted Robots. Zelu, the main character, is paraplegic because of an accident she had when she was younger. And because of her newfound fame, she's invited to participate in an experimental MIT program that restores the use of her legs. The third thing we follow through the book is her infuriating, so goddamn infuriating, um, high achieving family and the way they react to her newfound fame and how they're really creeped out by the treatment she underwent for her legs. That was the most annoying part to me. And right off the bat, this book was awesome. Karen, Theresa, I don't know what you guys thought of this book, but maybe Karen, where do you want to start with this review?
So I think that there's lots to love in this book. It's got, as you say, a lot of really interesting themes that are great for discussion. And a few of the reviews I read actually said it's a great book for that reason. We get to see sort of like a little peek into Nigerian culture and their family. There's lots of interesting pieces to pick up on about what is art and who makes art and how do we define art, and writing is encompassed in that. And there's also a lot around identity and disability. It's a really imaginative book, and there's a lot to discuss. As you said, I'm not 100% sold that the book within a book theme works really well here, but maybe we can talk about that. And I'll let Theresa say what she loved about it because she's excited. I can tell.
Yeah, over to you, Theresa.
I'm like practically vibrating off of my seat. Yeah, this is such an interesting book, and I'm quite honestly still chewing about it. And I'll probably be chewing on it for months to come. The book asks or poses a lot of questions, I think, and some of them I think are explored and perhaps answered, and some of them are frustratingly not. And I would really like to talk a bit more about how disability is treated in this book. I think that there's interesting conversations to be had about that. I was surprised by how much I like this book. It's totally out of my
Surprise.
usual wheelhouse, but it was really, really interesting. By no means a perfect book, but very, very interesting for sure. And I'm really glad that you called out that family, because I read a review that said we should be very sympathetic to the family. And
What? No.
no, not exactly. I had very visceral reactions to that to that family. So I'm glad that you called that out, and we are at least aligned in that opinion of them.
Okay, let's talk about the family. Because as Zelu, the main character, becomes really famous, and goes through this treatment to give her the use of her legs again, they are unsupportive in every single way possible. And I know that the family is meant to be infuriating, but it's also just annoying to read. I don't care how intentional it is. Sometimes it's just annoying to read, and it was the most frustrating part of this book to me. Do you know what I mean, Karen?
I do. I have a slightly different perspective, but I will note that the author herself said that this is sort of based on her own experiences, and she said she's quoted as saying, "I'm shining a light on my family, on my life, and I'm not hiding behind anyone with this one." So,
Good lord.
um, yeah. So I don't think that it's written sort of over the top. I do agree that there's lots of things to talk about with the family. This is part of what sort of intrigued me with regards to identity and disability, and how the family has seen the main character, and how she is sort of protected by them for her whole life, but how also she's kind of a loose cannon, and so you
Yeah.
can kind of understand why her family is a little bit nervous when she goes off on these adventures and these interesting experiences. I didn't find the family to be as maybe annoying as you did. I can see that for the most part, it comes from a place of love, but it definitely is an interesting factor in the character development.
It seems like
Zelu.
all that from her family is focused just on her and not on her other siblings. And to me, I think what really bothered me is the way that they even went back and positioned her accident as something intentional by her. I mean, it's intentional in the sense that she has this kind of like zest for life and this love for adventure. And her love for adventure is what led to her falling out of the tree and led to her having a disability. And I really disagreed with that frame of mind from her family. And their coddling seemed to be focused entirely on her, and not on the other siblings who had all this kind of different success that they felt was of more value than what she was trying to do in her life.
They always turned it back to the family as an entity, right? Like when
Mm.
she had an accident when she was younger, the message was like, how could you do this to us? Do you
Yeah,
know how complicated this is for us?
yeah,
When
yeah.
she got her treatment, which was really cool, by the way, she gets these sort of like exoskeletons that kind of clamp around her legs and can like animate them and like hold them up. It's really cool. It uses like AI and stuff. Anyways, really cool concept. I wonder if that's going to happen eventually. But when she got that treatment, her family just saw her as like a freak, like a just a piece of experimentation. And they're like, how could you do this to us? Did you not think of how what people would think of us, like the family? And I saw some reviewers online saying this is just criticism of collectivist cultures and how it's
Mm-hmm.
all about the family and less about like the individual freedom of these people to be
Mm-hmm.
individuals.
And definitely the way that the family is like perceived by other people, right? And like maybe it's a specific cultural thing, but there's definitely more value placed on how others see you and your family unit and your success, and not so much on ensuring that each individual is happy and doing what they want to do and not doing something for the performative aspect of it, of being perceived as successful in the family unit.
And they don't really learn anything. Like that family doesn't exactly grow. That's one of the most frustrating parts of
Yeah,
that plot line.
they do not grow at all.
You could argue that Zelu herself doesn't exactly grow, but I'm kind of okay with it because from the start, she's presented as not exactly likable, but fascinating. She's like stubborn and undiplomatic. And even her internal dialogue, I don't know about you guys, but I thought a lot of it just came off really mean. Like she would just like talk crap about a lot of people that didn't really deserve it. It kind of came off like very bitter, and I kind of understand it. It makes sense to me. Did you get that sense from her internal dialogue, Karen?
I did find her to be a little bit argumentative, a little bit crass, a little bit confrontational, intentionally confrontational. Yeah. But I think that for me, that kind of goes back to identity and who she is and how she sees herself in relation to her family, and how she sees herself in relation to the world. She I don't want to say that she's walking around with a chip on her shoulder, but I do suspect that there is some of that, and it's not without merit that she feels that way. But
no, not at all.
Yeah, but I do agree that she's not a super likable character. Although I grew to like her more as we sort of moved through the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, but her, and her default is. Her default is fear and anger in a lot of her responses. Like when, even when she's asking about her treatment and that sort of thing, like the default position is always fear and anger, which I also understand from her like position and her, the PTSD that she has from her accident and that sort of thing. So yeah, I didn't find her super likable, but I don't know that prevented me from eventually liking her.
Yeah, exactly. Everything you just said is true, but also you want to see her succeed. It's just that type of character. So as the listeners can probably tell, this is a book that does a lot of things at the same time. It explores racism, ableism, the immigrant experience, fame, and social media, and the nature of storytelling, art, the audience, and the creator themselves. And I would normally be annoyed. By a book that tries to do too much. But in this case, it doesn't feel like 10 stories being told at once. Everything is interconnected and forms everything else. Because the book that she writes, Rusted Robots, directly has a lot of parallels with the Zelu's life herself, and it gets to the point where the main character in Rusted Robots, remember that's the book within a book, is also a robot that effectively like has a disability, and so people kind of draw parallels between the author and the main character in the book. And Karen, you mentioned that you thought that the book within a book aspect in this thing was not exactly done perfectly. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I found the secondary book, The Rusted Robots, difficult to engage with, especially early on. So the sort of the weight between the two books shifts over the course of the book. So it starts out much more about Zulu, and then it shifts more into what's happening in the Rusted Robots storyline. But I did find that it was hard to engage with from that perspective. And I also felt like the book, it did take on a lot and it did justice to most of it, but it felt like there were a lot of balls in the air sometimes. And to me, it felt a little bit like things were sort of being thrust into the book sometimes in a way that didn't sort of feel like it was like a natural build from my perspective. But, overall, I think that the book is definitely worth reading. It's the kind of book where I think you want to read it and have somebody to talk to about it because there's so many pieces of it. I'm not a sci-fi fan. This is not usually in my wheelhouse either, and so it was a bit of a stretch for me from that perspective. But I do feel like sci-fi needs me to set down some of my preconceived notions about what's going to happen in a book, and just sort of let the book live on its own terms. But that's hard for me. So,
Oh,
so
it's also important to mention that you do get quite a few chapters, like full chapters of Rusted Robots. So it's like
the
2 stories within one book, to be absolutely clear.
Yeah, and if it had alternated on a more consistent basis from one story to the next, like one chapter and then the next is the Rusted Robots, and then go back to the main story, but it doesn't do that, and so there's a lot of threads to hold in this book as you read through it.
And there's more Death of the Author than there is Rusted Robots, I'm pretty sure. I think maybe the quarter of the book is Rusted Robots, but even if it's not the most engaging story, the sci-fi part, it ends up being very central to the whole theme of the book,
Yes,
to the conclusion.
I thought that part was well done. Yeah.
Yeah, the ending was awesome, by the way, and we will get to that. Theresa, what did you think of the sci-fi bit, Rusted Robots?
Yeah, I thought it was great, and I mean, I don't want to spoil the ending right now, but I think that aspect of it became a lot more profound for me, and asked a lot of more questions of me after reading that final chapter in the book. And it kind of just my brain kind of just exploded at that point, and I was like, whoa. I really loved it. I thought it was just beautifully rendered, this like alternate post-human Earth, and I felt especially drawn to this idea of robots that flew into the sun. I don't know why it felt so sad and melancholy, and in this weird kind of way that I haven't yet fully processed why. Um, yeah.
Well, it's the last vestiges of humanity making the decision on their own to end themselves. And I think there's something
Yeah.
kind of poetic about that. Hmm.
Yeah, and the fact that they kind of
Mhm.
sing into madness is just quite something.
The Rusted Robots was hard to follow, because you don't get the whole book. You kind of get snippets. So it definitely demands a lot more of your time and engagement. Uh, but it's also like the sci-fi concepts in Rusted Robots are pretty heady. And like I would honestly struggle to explain to you the plot of Rusted Robots. So part of me feels like it's not necessarily the point. Like the primary story is the story of Zelu and her rise to fame and her interactions with her family and how it relates to her disability and whatnot. But if I could back up for a second about the disability bit, because to me this is one of the most interesting parts of the book and the way that it handles it. Um, but there's this one scene that I thought was a really great example of this. It was when she went on. It's when she starts uses her exos in public, and she goes on this big interview show where she's ambushed by the interviewer, and the interviewer asks her questions about the message it's sending for a rich, successful person with a disability to use her money and fame to essentially erase her disability, implying that she's ridding herself of the role of role model. And we could see a world where treatments for disabilities are only available to the rich, and this kind of thing is honestly like a realistic real world occurrence. And it's uncomfortable to think that disability could become a sign of lack of wealth. Basically, if you could just erase disability, and then it made me ask questions about like role models and like, if you have a disability, do you have a duty to represent that disability? Are you Do you have the individuality to have the right to essentially erase your disability if given the opportunity? Anyways, it brought me. It was a good exercise in hypothetical situations and dilemmas that could potentially be um, real questions asked in the near future. And that's one of the beauty of sci-fi, is that it makes you question the dilemmas of the future that aren't even here yet.
what was interesting for me for that part is I think that the author did a really excellent job of tying together some questions and some interesting ideas. So I did a little bit of Googling. In Nigerian culture, people with disabilities are really ostracized. And so it's mentioned in the book a
Mm.
couple times that she can't go back to her homeland, a place that she had loved. And so, when she has that interview and she essentially sort of gets ostracized from the
Oh.
community, I thought it was an
Mm.
interesting parallel that she, would have been ostracized in her Nigerian culture because of her disability, and as she overcomes that disability in the American culture, she gets ostracized for doing that. And so it's a bit of a you can't win either way. And I thought that played really well into the whole idea around identity and disabilities, and would be a really interesting topic to explore sort of more deeply.
And you kind
Uh,
of understand the bitterness in that case. It's like she
yeah,
can't
for
win. Whatever she does, it's a lose-lose.
And one of the AI characters says something like, I've got a quote here. It says, "Body is not a god. The experience of the world is much deeper and wider than any one body can hold." And I thought that was, again, a really interesting perspective on a book that has so much about disability and ability and all of the aspects that tie into that. So there's lots in this book, and I think that um, you can find interesting things to talk about, even if your perspectives are not the same as some of the characters. But that part I thought she did really well in terms
Yeah.
of the writing.
Teresa, you were
Yeah.
vibrating as we started recording this. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like you have so much to say. Where do you want to
I
take this?
do. I mean, it's so interesting that you point out that little piece about that journalist, because I think it's one of the most interesting questions that is posed in this book, and probably one of the pieces that I'm so dissatisfied about in this book, because the journalist asked this question, and it's such an interesting question, because I think that in reality, in real life, this is a question that people have asked, that that ask about this, um, and we have this moment where it feels like the main character is canceled for her response to this. But in fact, I thought the book really kind of like ended that discussion. It didn't really pursue it at all.
I thought the
The,
same
the
thing.
question was asked, and then she's canceled, and then she very conveniently shuts herself off from social media, and then it seems to really blow over. But it's such a interesting question. And maybe we shouldn't expect that the book answers that question, I suppose. But like, I wish that we talked about it a bit more. And I don't know. To me, it seemed like the main character's disability became more of a means to an end than something. I don't know how to phrase this. It felt like it kind of became a plot point, especially when you kind of get to the ending. And again, I don't want to spoil it, but to me, it just kind of made me rethink her as a character.
I don't know. To me, you're not wrong. I thought the exact same thing, that the question was asked,
Hmm.
is what is the signals that she's sending with her essentially erasing her disability correct? Like, what is her duty in that regard?
Hmm.
um Fantastic question, and she kind of
Yeah.
got canceled for it. But it's
Hmm.
never really explored again, or
No.
factors into the second half of the book
Yeah.
at that
I th-
point.
I think the book becomes way more about art and about writing and writers and authors than it really does about anything else. I think that's kind of what what the actual author is telling us about this book.
I'm personally on Zelu's side in what she decided to do in getting these exos that let her walk again. If you have a disability, it's your body. You can do what you want with it. Like, you don't have a duty to the rest of the disability community to be a role model. Like, who cares what message you're sending? It's not your problem. Like otherwise, like who? It feels like you're owned if you have the duty to have that responsibility. At least that was my interpretation.
It's an interesting question. I think that a lot of people like actors and authors, suddenly they become these role models and they have to be perfect and they have to act in a certain way and they have to be the best representatives for everybody, and people
They
kind
never
of lose their
asked to be role
humanity.
models. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you in the end of the day, you forget that these people are humans, right? And they have ownership of themselves and their lives and what they want to do. And I don't know that there's one answer for what Zelu ended up doing, but I think that you're right in saying that that's like up to an individual to decide what they want to do, and maybe it's not her role to be that role model to everybody.
I think it feeds into the question of, if you have a platform, are you required to use it in order to better
Yes.
other people? And
That's a
so
great way to put it.
that kind of ties into how the book ends a little bit with regards to what's the purpose of writing, and how does that intersect with art and fame and influence and storytelling. And I just thought that was an interesting piece of the whole book.
I need to spoil the ending because the ending is awesome and
Yeah.
absolutely blew my mind when it
Yep.
happened. So this is a spoiler alert for the ending. So basically, what happened is Zelu writes the sci-fi story, Rusted Robots, but then while in the sci-fi story, the robot, the android, writes they learn to actually write fiction, which is this big epiphany for the androids and the AIs, and they write the story of Zelu. So it's a closed loop, leaving you to wonder, wait, which is the real world and which is the book inside a book? Is it Rusted Robots or is it Death of the Author?
It's
Because the name of the book that the main character in Rusted Robots writes is Death of the Author. It's a closed loop.
I totally interpreted that we got it backwards. So all that story about Zelu is actually it's the story from the robot, right? And then all those chapters that we interpreted as chapters of her book are
Were
actually
fiction.
the reality.
Huh.
So this is what blew my mind, because I was like, oh, in fact, all those pages that we were reading about Zelu and her family and all this kind of stuff actually came from this robot, came from AI.
Which this book came out in 2025, and we're actually dealing with AI written fiction nowadays. So
yeah, and we had it all like we saw it totally different in our eyes. We thought that those pages about the robots were her rusted robots, but I don't think that wasn't rusted robots at all. That was the main character robot, his story of Zelu and her writing and then a writer. And that's why I just like my mind kind of just exploded at the final chapter.
Karen, final thoughts.
The author in an interview said that this book is made to be reread, especially when you get to the ending. And I totally agree to that. I think you need to read it. It's the kind of book you might want to read twice, because as you go back, your perspective, once you know the ending, you go back, your perspective flips on some of the conversations she has with her family and the interviews that they dedicate a chapter to her dad and a chapter to some of the other characters. And so it is really kind of a mind-blowing book, but you have to really pay attention to get all of these things. Like it demands that you are fully integrated into this book.
Mm-hmm.
I think that wraps it up. I think we said not even 10% of what needs to be said, but people can read it and interpret it themselves. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I'll see you again soon.
Our pleasure. Have a great day.
That was Karen McKay and Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access, and we were reviewing Nnedi Okorafor's Death of the Author. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours on the channel. We're on all the big podcasting platforms, and that includes YouTube. You can leave us feedback at AMI Audiobook Review. Sorry, that's at Audiobook Review at AMI.ca. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Happy listening.